Welcome back to another episode of ChamberTalk, a podcast brought to you by Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce. I'm your host, Finlay Jack. We're tying in our latest episodes with the theme of our next edition of the Business Bulletin, the North East's biggest business publication. That theme is inspirational leaders. And who better to chat to than a man who led Aberdeen Football Club to their last piece of silverware in 2014, hopefully a record that gets broken soon, and someone who works tirelessly to improve the lives of children in socially deprived areas across Aberdeen, Russell Anderson. Russell, thanks very much for joining us. We'll delve into your career a bit more shortly on the pitch and kind of post-playing days too. But let's talk leadership first. Did you always feel like you were a leader, or did it just kind of come naturally to you?
I would say it came over time.
Mm-hmm.
I remember actually when I was given the captaincy by Scovdal, which was a long, long time ago. And at that point there, I was still pretty young.
Yeah, reasonably young in your career.
Yeah, and also the team was going through a bit of a difficult spell at that point. And I know, looking back, there were quite a few people that probably questioned the decision by the manager to give it to me. I was probably, and I know this from having spoken to people, thought I was too quiet, didn't have enough of an influence on the team and the changing room.
Mm-hmm.
And there was perhaps validity in those arguments early doors. But I feel like with a lot of people, you kind of grow into the role.
Mm-hmm.
I think it comes from experience and learning off different people. And prior to that, and since then, I've worked with a lot of good people, captains at the club, different clubs. So you kind of learn off of them without probably realizing it, but also recognizing that you have to kind of go down your own route and be true to yourself. Otherwise, people will see right through it. So it was definitely a job that needed work in practice, I would say. By the time I retired, I would say that I was a very different captain to the one that I was when I was first given the role.
Was there a bit of a steep learning curve then, I guess, at a young age, going through a difficult time? You must have learned a hell of a lot about yourself as well as leadership.
Yeah, I think especially when things are going well, changing rooms and teams kind of seem to run themselves to an extent, and that's maybe been maybe underplaying I suppose, the role of the captain. But you're hoping that you're surrounded by good players, good pros that are also thinking the same way. And I think a big part of a manager's role, and I've seen it over the years, managers will talk about getting good players into the club, but also good people. And it's no surprise to see if you've got a healthy changing room and people all pulling in the right direction, then you tend to see better results in the pitch, and it's a better environment that you're hoping players will kind of really do well out of.
Was there anyone, I guess, back in the day, either in the Aberdeen team or elsewhere, that you could have tried to base your captaincy style off of? Any role models in that sense at all?
I would say, going back to that point, the one I would say initially would have been Derek White.
Mm-hmm.
So when Whitey came in, Alec Miller signed him from Middlesbrough.
Mm-hmm.
So he had good experience in terms of being a captain already at a team that had played in the Premier League, Championship at a high level. And I think without realising at the time, I think watching Whitey as a young player as I was, just kind of coming into the changing room and trying to make my way as a player first and foremost. Looking back now, you probably did pick things up from him without realising at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been plenty over the years. Not so much I would specifically say captains, but just good role models in terms of players that you would, for want of a better term, want to have in the trenches with you.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn from all of them, to be honest. And I would also extend that to managers, coaches, backroom staff, that kind of stuff. Just good character traits and personalities that you think, they would help you out if you needed any help. And yeah, there's been quite a few of them. And like I say, you learn off them bit by bit. You then become your own person.
What would you say, kind of, how did you evolve, I guess, going from early to mid-noughties when you first got the armband, I think, up until 2014 when you retired? What changed? Was it confidence? Was it being louder on the pitch? How did you evolve over that decade and a bit?
The funny thing is, I think people will always say, "Oh, you're not vocal enough on the pitch."
Yeah.
It's easy to say that if you're sitting in the stand. You don't necessarily have to be the loudest one on the pitch screaming at people. I think there's a role for organisational skills and also to motivate players as well. But different players will react in different ways to how you try and motivate them. And I think you've got to kind of work that out for yourself and see what makes a player tick, and then what makes the changing room tick. And I think I learned that along the way, to be honest. I was more, I would say, that the type of captain that would lead by example.
Yeah.
And I think the confidence came from, if you're playing well yourself, then you can then start to kind of concentrate on other parts of the team, and it just becomes second nature to you that you're focusing on your own game, but you're also thinking about the bigger picture in terms of how you can help, and to be honest, how the players can actually help you as well. And I think there's a lot to be said for, going back to my previous point about good players around you that you can rely on. And I would say, thinking more recently towards the end of my career, that changing room we had under Derek McInnes, there were some really good players,
some good pros who have done really good
and
things
people
since then,
in that changing room that had the right work ethic, the right attitude, that you could rely on. You think even if things weren't going so well from game to game, you knew that they were the right type of people you want to have next to you.
It was, I think, 321 appearances in your first spell. And I guess to me, quite often, a mark of a leader, the mark of a person is often how they deal with adversity. And you certainly had your fair share of that after Aberdeen. The £1 million transfer down the road, probably about £10 million these days, thereabouts.
There's a waste of money for Sunderland.
There's a bit of pressure on you going down, obviously, and then you spent, well, a hell of a long time with the physiotherapist. That must be a difficult time mentally as much as anything for you.
Yeah, there's a recurring theme in my career that I got quite close with a lot of the physios because I spent that much time with them. Starting with Aberdeen, when I did my cruciate when I was pretty young. And then, you've obviously touched on it, most of my time at Sunderland. Early days was spent in the treatment room for a variety to pretty serious injuries, which does test your character. But I think it comes back to that, I suppose, that original point of having the right character traits just to respond in the right way. And I think the one thing that you're guaranteed in football is disappointment. So I think you need to be resilient, whether that is bad results, bad periods of form, or injuries, if you're out for a long spell of time. So kind of just got used to it. It was almost as if you saw it as a challenge. You need to kind of get back to being fit again to try and recover some kind of form, because at the end of the day, if you don't, your contract expires and then you're out of a job. So there's a lot that's going on there, as well as just the football side of it. You're also thinking the other side with your family, that they have to go through the kind of pain with you as well, seeing the frustration, and obviously relocating down to a different place, hoping that the football, that's the reason you're going. That gets taken away from you to an extent.
How early on did you think about life after football? Because I say, if you're injured seriously, which you were at probably late 20s, thereabouts, that's early to think about post-football.
It was actually earlier than that. I tore my anterior cruciate when I was 21, and I was out for a year and a half. So at that point there, it seemed to take forever to come back, and that was the point that I started to think. We just had our eldest, Jevon, who's now 24. He was 1 at the time, so you're thinking that it's more than just about me. You then have to think about, well, if this doesn't work out, what am I going to do afterwards? Because I'd left school after 5th year. Obviously hadn't gone to university because I'd gone straight into playing full-time football. So that was the point that I started to think about needing a backup plan just in case. Thankfully, I didn't need it for a long time, but ultimately that's what I've ended up doing in my day job.
And you still did retire, I guess, early, probably, for a footballer. I think you're about 34 thereabouts when you...
Easy, 36.
Was it 36? Sorry, I thought earlier. Even then,
fair,
you see defenders play. Sean Dillon's at midfield, he's 41.
Exactly, right. And some people might argue that last year I took it off anyway. So, I would have been 37 in October. I retired in the May, but that last season, I played the last game of the season. I think I played the first one and had just a nightmare time with injuries, to the point where I knew that was going to be me, because I'd always said that when I came back to the club. I knew they were taking a gamble on me, and I knew there was a lot of people who would have thought, well, why are we taking him back? He's hardly played for 5 years. He's just going to be picking up a salary, and will he actually add any value to the club? Um, so
I've no idea what that was. The joys of a life podcast.
exactly, Union Street.
I know.
So I kind of knew at that point when I was going through it was one thing after another that final season, and I kind of thought back to what I said to Craig Brown when he signed, was that I was if I couldn't add anything, I felt like I wasn't adding any value, then that would be the time for me to kind of decide, call it a day. And that's how I was glad that I did it. By the end of the season, I was actually back playing, training, and felt
Really?
okay. But I'd already made my mind up
Yeah.
about November, December time, that it was going to be my last season.
I think I've spoken to a number of ex-pros, and the one thing they always say they miss the most is the camaraderie, the changing. Was it the same with you? Is that your biggest miss from football?
I think it was at the time. I think what helped me initially was that when I finished playing, I moved upstairs into the commercial department. So even though I wasn't part of the changing room, I was still part of the club. So you could still see the players, although that in itself, the longer it was there, you saw them going away to training, playing, doing well, playing in Europe and stuff. There is a little bit of envy that sets in. I'm not going to deny that. But I think that helped me to an extent. But you're right, you do miss that, I suppose, the camaraderie, for one way of putting it. Feeling like you've got a common cause, to be honest, training all week for a game on a Saturday, and if you come out of that game the other side with a win and you've played well, it's a really good feeling that you've done it with the rest of your teammates you're changing.
Do you ever, just finally on your football career, do you ever look back at let's say the cup final in 2014 when you won the League Cup? Do you ever look back, watch that YouTube video? Is it something that you reflect on often?
Occasionally. Well, obviously this year was the 10-year
10th year, of
anniversary
course, yeah.
of doing it, and I can't believe it's 10 years. So we had like a reunion event on behalf of my foundation back in March. So we got near enough everybody back, most of the players, the manager, Tony Dock, the backroom staff.
It's a good effort given everyone is. Yeah.
The vast majority of who was involved at the club that time, the kit man, gym, physios, everybody that played a part, I wanted kind of to be there just to kind of enjoy the evening and get back together for the point that you make, because you can go months or years without seeing an individual, but if you put them all together from a specific team and time into the same room, then you just kind of slip back into your old ways. And it was a good night. So from that point of view, I watched a bit of the footage for that event, and it was nice to kind of bring back some good memories, even though the game itself was underwhelming.
Cool, wasn't it?
But at the end of the day,
a win's a win.
Didn't
it's a
really
cup final.
matter for a cup final. We could have been on the other end of that, having played in a poor game and lost. So just relieved, delighted that it did actually work out that way.
So from leading on the pitch to leading off the pitch, the foundation started still in your playing days. Firstly, why start it? And at what point did you make the decision that you wanted to crack on with this charity work?
So I need to give the credit to that to Serene Wood and Paul Laurie to an extent. When I came back from England, I'd just come back from Derby. I was trying to concentrate on getting fit, but at the same time, Paul Laurie approached me, who'd been doing some work with Serene Wood in his own foundation, to say that he wanted to have a chat. I was open to having that discussion. I wasn't really sure what it was about, where it was going, but essentially he was looking to set up some kind of football coaching sessions for kids in the city that perhaps had barriers in the way, that couldn't access those football sessions like a lot of the other kids can. And he wanted somebody to put their name to it, just to kind of to drive it. So it was a bit of a blank canvas other than that, but he was very clear in terms of the kind of children that he wanted to help. So that's where it started. And it was simply, when I was still playing, we'd go down to Riverbank Primary School on a Tuesday afternoon, myself and one other coach, Graham Burnett, who's still working with us now. And we would put on an hour session for the kids free of charge. We'd go to the school, do it, and then that first hour became really popular, so we had to put a second hour on, and then the rest is kind of history. It just grew arms and legs in terms of the other schools in the area heard about what we were doing, so they wanted us to kind of expand it to open it up to more children. So we did that. I would say the game changer for us was that the schools then wanted us to get involved within school time. So rather than the after school clubs, it was more about, well, we're really struggling to meet the government target of this 2 hours of quality PE that is an expectation, a requirement, for children in Scotland. Can you come in and basically help our teachers to deliver sessions that are engaging? Kids are really buying into it and they're getting that quality exercise. So that's where we started to go into the school. So at that point there, we then had to start to recruit some coaches to be able to do that, which then creates its own kind of pressures in terms of fundraising for it to be able to pay for the coaches. And that then extended into, well, if we're looking to help them improve their health and well-being and their fitness, essentially PE sessions, what are the other barriers that they face, the challenges to try and improve their life chances and close what they call that attainment gap, which you can see with some of the more deprived areas of society. So that leads into the educational side of it in terms of, well, if you are engaged and you're fit and you're active, well, that can improve your outcomes in the classroom. They're more engaged in the classroom, attention levels, that kind of stuff. And then you look at the nutritional side of it. Are they eating well enough? Do they know how to eat well? Are they able to cook well at home? So you're then looking at all the different little bits and pieces of how we can, I suppose, improve their life chances.
There's a quote from you on your website. I really related to it, actually, and I love it. I'll read it out here. Have you ever tried to teach a child maths using a textbook? It's like trying to teach a cat to swim, but teach them maths through sport, and suddenly they're calculating angles like it's second nature. What was the thinking behind that? Was it, I guess, to try and close that attainment gap, as you said?
It is. I mean, you look at the outcomes. I've learned an awful lot about this over the last 10 years because I was oblivious to an awful lot of the poverty in the city. I'm honest enough to say I was brought up in the West End, really good upbringing, didn't want for anything. So to see the levels of poverty and the challenges that a lot of these families and children are facing was a bit of an eye-opener to me. And I still think it is for a lot of people in the city. In terms of that side of it, it's trying to engage with the kids and do it in a way that they're not just going to get bored. Now, I was at one of my boys' football matches last week, and there was a guy came up to me, and his wife works in one of the schools, and he was talking up what our coaches are doing, because I need to give them a lot of kind of credit. It's them that are the role models for the children. It's the coaches that actually are the people that the children will come to the sessions for. So, and he pretty simply put it is that they'll come to school just because of our sessions. Now, a lot of the time, the kids might not be engaged enough. They might actually just not turn up. So if you're actually getting them through the door just because they're getting an hour of something that they enjoy, you're then hoping that you've got them in the school. You can try on work on other areas to kind of improve the educational side of it. So it's not rocket science, but it's just engaging with them.
But it is difficult, though, to keep children engaged, and so they learn.
Yes, exactly. And one of the challenges we've had, and this was probably pretty true for some of the teachers when we ever went into a new school, because we're an external partner, I think, well, what are they a way to bring to the party here? It's football. Not everyone likes football. We made a conscious decision fairly early on that this is not about football anymore. There is still a football element to it. So the after school clubs, for example, the kids want to play football, absolutely. But it's more about participation and getting the kids engaged, whether it's football, whether it's tennis, athletics, or even arts and crafts. So more recently, we've started to do stuff in holidays for the kids. So summer camp, October camp, Easter camp. And the summer camp that we had there at the Sports Village, who have been really helpful in terms of providing that venue. First time we put on an arts and crafts room for the kids that wanted to come, maybe weren't that involved, didn't want to play any kind of sport. And we had too many kids. We had 40 kids. We've only really had spaces for 30 in the room that we had dedicated to it. So it just goes to show that there's an interest there. Now that summer camp, I think we had about 100 kids a day, and it was all free of charge.
Yeah.
Because again, if you put a price in there, a lot of them wouldn't be able to come. So
I was just looking at kind of the growth you've done. You touched on when it started 10 years ago with an hour with yourself. I think this year alone, you raised more than 100k at a ball. You've expanded partnerships with the likes of ASV, as you've said. You had your first full-time fundraiser. I think you're up to a dozen, or is it 14 coaches now?
Yeah.
And you're impacting thousands of children every single week. It must be, there's still a hell of a lot of work to do. I'm sure you'll know that, but it must be nice to kind of take stock and realise that what started as an hour-long football session is now impacting on a massive chunk of your city.
Yeah. It's become a bit of a monster, to be honest. And I think some of that comes from the schools will be very open to come to us with ideas as to maybe what they would like to do if we can support in any way. So I suppose our approach to it has always been to try and make things happen. Now you're right. I think I kind of lose track now, but I think we're in 14 primary schools. We're also working with St Machar Academy just to try and continue that engagement into secondary school and beyond. For that matter, it's something else that we're working on at the moment. But it does, you take a step back and you think there's been a huge amount of growth over the last few years. The fundraising, you touched on it, does then become a very big part of the sustainability of the charity. And we've always, you hear a lot of people use the word sustainable these days. For us, it means a couple of different things. Firstly, the charity needs to be sustainable in the first place. What that really means for the kids is that if you go into a new school, it needs to be sustainable in terms of that long-term partnership to work with the kids to try and benefit them. There's no point going in for 6 months or a year and then come back out because you don't have the funding to be able to support it for the longer term. And we've always had that right at the top of our, I suppose, to make sure that if there is a school that we go into, it's going to be for the long term, because there is a lot of uncertainty in these children's lives. And you don't want to add to that by coming in for maybe 6 months and then disappearing. And then there's a gap there that the school need to fill, and then they're left to pick up the pieces. So I touched on the coaches before. They're role models. Some of them have been at like Tilly Drone for 10 years. Wow. So they've seen kids from nursery go all the way through to P7 up into secondary school.
And probably further on.
And you make a good point, because we've actually got some of the kids have come back now to volunteer and work for us.
Who originally started,
Yes. So they get it. And it's a nice kind of story to tell that they've been right the way through, they've seen the benefit of what they do, and then they want to come back and volunteer or work for us. And we've got one guy, Saul, that I can think off the top of my head. He's now back working for us, and he's been right the way through. So like I say, that kind of thing, even if it's just one child's life that you can maybe turn around and give them a better outcome, then I think it's definitely worth it. I think there'll be many more.
Yeah.
We can't change the world, but you're just trying to give them that chance.
How do you cope with all of this? Because you're also a full-time independent financial advisor at Aberdeen Contadine. So between running a foundation, doing that, and probably umpteen other football works you do, it must be a busy old life you live.
It is very different to the old life. You were probably finished early afternoon if you wanted to be. You could go and pick the kids up from school. Now you were away weekends for games and stuff. So it was a very different life that you were used to, different pressures. But it is, when I look at my day now, I'm up a lot earlier than I used to be. It's busy between work, which is really busy. And I've been there 7 years now. I can't believe where the time's gone, actually. Going back to my original point about working with good people, I've found that with Aberdeen Considine Wealth. I think I'm very happy with what I'm doing. And to kind of complement that, the work that you do for the foundation also gives you a good feeling when you hear those anecdotal stories about this teacher saying this about a certain kid, or a mum or a dad saying good things about how the children are enjoying what we're doing. So it is very different, but it's busy, but it's rewarding. It's really rewarding.
Is there any parallels you can draw from leading on the pitch to leading the foundation now, or is it a totally different beast? I mean, it is in many ways, but is there much of the same qualities you think that you're needing to do both?
Do you know what I find? The more I've been away from football and working in just normal world or foundation and
Yeah.
stuff, I think it's dealing with people.
Hmm.
Now, if you think about the old school ways that perhaps changing rooms would have been run, for want of a better term, the manager, the old hairdryer effect. It's been well
Yeah.
documented. I think you more and more you're in different environments. I think you can take a lot from when I played and when I was in that
Hmm.
football environment, but looking at it from a completely different perspective in terms of my day job and
Yeah.
also the foundation, and it's just how you kind of deal with people, what makes them tick, what motivates them, and like I say, you can learn from it, but there's also sometimes I hear some of the stories about what still goes on with certain changing rooms in football circles, and you kind of think, well, is that the best way to
Yeah.
get the best performance out of a player or a team, for
Hmm.
example? So that's probably what I would take from it.
Yeah.
I think it's a good blend of thinking about how things used to be, and I still think there's an element of people need to be accountable. There's
Hmm.
no doubt of that,
Yeah.
whether whatever walk of life you're in.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the big thing for me now for the foundation is looking at maybe the next 5 years in terms of where we're going with it.
Mhm.
That funding challenge with what we've got to try and sustain it over the longer term. And I suppose this is going to be a bit of a plug. I'm delighted to kind of say that we've been speaking to Apache recently over the last few weeks about them coming on board with
Mhm.
what we're doing, and they've agreed to become one of our strategic partners for the South of the
Brilliant.
City, which is a massive coup for
Mhm.
us because they really like what we're doing, trying to give the children an opportunity in life. So from that point of view, it's exciting news for us,
Mhm.
and it will allow us to kind of grow our content into some of the schools in the south side
Mhm.
of the city.
Just finally, I guess, is that where you see the growth coming? Is it reaching more schools? Is it extending more into secondary schools and further
Well,
up than that?
this there are so many more primary schools that we could go into.
Yeah.
The challenge is
It's
funding
money,
it.
isn't it? Yeah,
It
it's
is,
the
and
coaches,
we don't
etc.
want to dilute the quality because
Hmm.
then the outcomes for the kids are not the same.
Hmm.
I think where we see growth is in terms of what we're offering within the existing schools that we're doing, but also trying to work a bit more closely with secondary schools. So I touched on St Margaret
Yeah.
before. We're looking at a career kind of pathway for children in the secondary school. We've been doing some work with NHS over the last few months. That they've had some members of staff have come into the primary schools to deliver roadshows
Yeah.
effectively. So try and improve the educational side of it for the
Hmm.
kids. But they've got an aim that they want to try and highlight the NHS as an employer
Of
for
course.
whether that's doctors, nurses,
Hmm.
electricians, HR, wherever it is. So we've been working closely with them over the last few months, and it's the same kind of thing that we're looking to try and develop a career pathway for kids that are coming out of school to give them opportunities that they might not go to university, they might not go to college, but can they get some work experience or can they get an apprenticeship?
Hmm.
So that's something that I can see over the longer term forming a bigger part of what we're looking to
Hmm.
do, whilst at the same time still concentrating on
Of
the
course.
core,
The bread and butter, really.
yeah,
Yeah.
the primary schools,
Hmm.
and trying to instill good habits and improve their outcomes.
And just lastly, it wouldn't be right if I didn't ask you about Aberdeen. At the time of recording, that this will go out in a few weeks. 8 in a row for Jimmy Tilleen, joint top of the league.
Yeah.
Your record of being the last man to lift a trophy could be over soon. How do you feel about
I would be delighted if Graham was able to do that this season. I think they've started well. It's amazing what can happen when you get a little bit of confidence.
that? Hmm.
It can spread through the team. Probably go back to Jimmy Calderwood when he came in.
Yeah.
We had a poor season previously, and it didn't take much for it to turn round with a couple of important signings, but also momentum. It's massive, and they seem to have that at the moment. They're playing well. They seem to be playing with a bit of freedom.
Yeah.
confidence, and they're playing as a unit as well. And from what I've seen so far, it's been a great start. I think you'll have bitten your hand off for it when you come in. There'll be challenges to come. There's no doubt in that, but I think they're in a good place at the moment. Hopefully that continues for the rest of the season.
And just to tie it all together, one thing I noticed when I'm at Pittodrie is, especially this season, there seems to be a hell of a lot of leaders on the pitch, and that must bode well. Shinnie, obviously the captain, but Nelson Exum in midfield and a couple of defenders. There's some real loud characters there, which can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I think. See, when things are going well and people are confident, I mean, there are personality traits that you look for in players. I think they'll come out a bit more if you're playing well, which I think you'll kind of see. But there are, I think, players in that team that will support Graham. That he's a very good captain. He leads by example, and he'll be able to rely on some of his teammates as well, just to kind of keep the standards high, motivate when it's needed. And I think I haven't met the manager yet, but by the looks of it, he's had a real impact so far in terms of he's not been in the door very long.
Couple of months.
So I don't know what his style is, that kind of stuff, but the supporters, and I include myself in that, have only got a Saturday between 3 and 4:45 to kind of judge what they will be working on a lot between Monday and Friday. You see what I mean? So, but so far it's looking positive.
So far, so good. Yeah. Russell, thanks very much for joining us on Chamber Talk. To find out more or to get involved with the foundation, you can visit russellandersonfoundation.org for all the info and more. Thanks again for listening to Chamber Talk. Please do like, share and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.